I thought hitting bottom meant the pain would stop. I was wrong. The night everything collapsed, the people I trusted watched it happen like it was entertainment. Every call ignored, every promise gone, until silence was all that answered back. Then came the message, sharp and final, proof that even family can twist the knife. I stared at the screen, not breaking, just changing. Because when there's nothing left, rebuilding becomes revenge in disguise. And when they came crawling back, smiling like nothing happened, I realized they didn't know me anymore. They thought I'd forgiven them. They had no idea what was coming next. The night I lost everything, the city felt quieter than usual, like it knew. My apartment lease had expired that morning. My final paycheck vanished by noon, and by sunset, I was sitting on a park bench with a single duffel bag, watching office lights flicker in the towers I used to belong to. At 12 a.m., my phone buzzed, a message from the family group chat that I hadn't muted out of some pathetic hope. "Congratulations," my brother wrote. "You finally hit rock bottom." Then my mother's name appeared, followed by a thumbs up emoji. I stared at it, the kind of numb that's too deep to even feel humiliation. It wasn't new, disappointment was their family language, but this was different. There was a precision to their cruelty tonight, as if they'd been waiting for me to fall so they could confirm it was final. I dropped the phone into my lap and looked at the skyline, wondering what a person becomes when even family stops pretending to care. 3 hours later, just before dawn, a notification cut through the silence. It was from Lila, my best friend since college, though we drifted after I lost my job. Her message was short. "I found something. Call me in the morning." By sunrise, I was on her couch, hair unwashed, mind half gone, clutching a coffee she'd made like it was a life raft. Lila worked at a high-end firm downtown, one of those marble and glass places that smelled like success and expensive perfume. "They're looking for a junior analyst," she said. "Temporary. But if you can get your foot in, you can move fast." She didn't sugarcoat it. She knew I'd burned out, that my last boss had buried me with impossible deadlines and then tossed me aside like it was my fault. Still, I went. The interview was surreal. The CEO barely looked up from his phone. The office felt like walking through a mirror, everyone polished, detached, their voices dipped in money. When I left, I didn't expect to hear back. But 2 days later, I did. "Welcome aboard," the email read. I stared at it for a long time, the words like static in my chest. The same night, my father's name popped up on my screen for the first time in months. I didn't answer. He texted, "Don't do anything embarrassing. People talk." That was his version of caring. I deleted it and set an alarm for 5 a.m. The next few months were a blur of movement and silent determination. I worked longer than anyone, listened more than I spoke, and when I did speak, I made sure people remembered it. The company ran on image and numbers. I understood both. My first big break came when I caught a discrepancy in a client's portfolio that everyone else had missed. The director called it luck. I called it the start. By the end of the quarter, I wasn't the assistant anymore. I was the one making decisions. Lila would laugh when I came home late, shaking her head. "You're becoming one of them," she'd say. I'd smile, but she didn't know how deep that transformation went. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something brick by brick, mask by mask. By the time I became fund manager, even the CEO started watching me differently. The same people who once ignored my presence now copied my tone in meetings. My inbox filled with invitations to dinners, to panels, to conversations that started with "I've been meaning to reach out." And then one evening, as I left a client event, my phone lit up again with a name I hadn't seen in a year: Mom. I almost laughed. The message was cautious, rehearsed. "We're proud of you. We didn't realize how well you were doing. Maybe we could talk sometime." Then another one: "We made a mistake." I stood outside the building, wind cutting through my coat, and read it twice. It was strange how suddenly guilt could masquerade as affection. Days later, my father called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his voice crack between words he wasn't used to saying. "We're in trouble," he admitted. "It's financial. We thought you might advise us." The irony almost made me smile. The same people who'd watched me fall now needed me to lift them. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I spent the next few nights studying, quietly collecting details. The debts, the failed investments, the small empire my father had built on arrogance, now crumbling. It was almost poetic. Lila noticed the shift in me. "You're quieter lately," she said one night. "Are you okay?" I told her I was fine, that I was just tired. But something sharper had awakened beneath that calm. When I finally agreed to meet them, it was in the lobby of the same company that once wouldn't even consider me for an entry-level job. My reflection in the glass didn't look like the girl who'd slept in a park 6 months earlier. My family arrived late, my mother clutching her purse, my brother pretending not to look uncomfortable, my father trying to appear in control. They spoke in half sentences, all circling the same desperate point. I listened, smiled politely, and when they finally said the words, "We need your help," I nodded once, as if considering it. In truth, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. My phone buzzed again, another message from my mother. "We're so grateful you're giving us another chance." I turned off the screen. By the next morning, the decision was made. I didn't write it down or say it aloud, but something in me had crossed a line that couldn't be reversed. The plan wasn't revenge, it was precision, control, balance restored after years of imbalance. I started small, quietly. I requested copies of my father's company filings under the pretense of a consultation. He didn't question it. Pride makes people blind, and he still believed I was the daughter desperate for approval. The documents arrived within a week, and by the second page, I saw exactly where their empire had begun to rot. They'd borrowed heavily, hidden losses through shell accounts, and used my mother's name as collateral without her even realizing it. When I called her, her voice cracked. "He said it was just a temporary thing," she whispered. "He said it was fine." I almost pitied her. Almost. Lila noticed how restless I'd become. "You're working later every night," she said, leaning against the kitchen counter while I sorted through files. "This doesn't feel like your job anymore." I didn't answer. She studied me, eyes narrowing. "Whatever you're planning, don't let it consume you." I smiled faintly. "It's not consuming me," I said. "It's clarifying me." She didn't believe me, and maybe she shouldn't have. A week later, I met with the CEO to discuss new fund expansions. He'd been watching me closely lately, testing, measuring. "You're sharp," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But sharp people cut themselves if they're not careful." I met his gaze. "Only if they forget who's holding the knife." He laughed, but his expression changed. Something in my tone had caught him off guard. That was fine. I needed his attention. I was positioning myself for something much bigger than a title. Meanwhile, my family's situation worsened. Their calls became more frequent, more desperate. My brother left voice messages pretending to sound calm. "It's just temporary. We only need help managing some assets." But I knew the truth. He'd gambled with investments he didn't understand, trying to prove himself to our father. When I didn't respond, he sent another message. "You're being cruel. You think you're better than us now." I deleted it. I didn't need to think I was better. I simply wasn't one of them anymore. Then came the unexpected twist. I received an email from a private investigator, someone I hadn't hired. He'd been retained by a concerned party to look into a client's fraud case that just happened to involve my father's company. The investigator wanted to meet. That night, I sat in a small cafe downtown, watching rain slide down the glass when he walked in. Older, quiet, the kind of man who noticed details. "You're connected to them," he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't deny it. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, transfers, offshore accounts, signatures. "Someone's been moving money through your company," he said. "Names are blurred, but the trail points to one of your own clients and your father's accounts linked to it." My chest tightened. "Who hired you?" He hesitated. "Your CEO." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk staring at the skyline, piecing it together. My boss had known about my family's trouble before I ever mentioned them. He'd probably known since the day I walked into the firm. The opportunity Lila had found for me, it hadn't been coincidence. It was placement. I was useful to someone. Maybe I'd been all along. I called Lila in the morning. "Did you recommend me directly?" I asked. She sounded confused. "Of course. I sent your resume myself. Why? Who told you about the opening? Silence. Then a soft, hesitant answer. The CEO asked if I knew anyone trustworthy. My stomach turned. You didn't think that was strange? I thought it was luck, she said. Why? I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. By noon, I was in his office. He looked calm, almost amused. You've been digging, he said. That's what I hired you for. You hired me because of my father, I said. He didn't deny it. Your family's business has been a liability in this market for years. We needed someone inside their circle. You gave us access we couldn't buy. My hands tightened around the folder I carried. You used me. He smiled faintly. You used yourself. You wanted to win. You just didn't ask what game we were playing. For a long moment, I said nothing. The truth was cold, but it made everything make sense. The sudden opportunity, the quiet promotions, the way he'd always seemed one step ahead. So what now? I asked. He shrugged. We take over your father's assets. You come out of it looking clean, maybe even wealthier. Everyone wins. His tone was almost kind, as if he were offering mercy. And if I refuse? Then you go down with them. And frankly, that would be a waste of potential. I walked out without a word. Outside, the city felt sharper, as if every sound cut a little deeper. I called Lila again. She didn't answer. I didn't try twice. I needed space to think. By the time I reached home, my phone was full of messages, my father, my brother, even my mother begging me to call back. The storm had already started, and they didn't even realize I wasn't on their side anymore. I opened my laptop and began moving files, quietly, systematically, piece by piece. Over the next few days, I played along. I met with my boss, smiled through the briefings, acted cooperative. But behind the scenes, I redirected data, copied key records, and prepared what would become the blueprint of their undoing. I wasn't protecting my family anymore. I was rewriting the narrative entirely. If I was a pawn, then I'd become the one who overturned the board. Then, late one night, as I packed the last set of files into a drive, there was a knock at my door. I hesitated before opening it. Lila stood there, rain-soaked, eyes red. You're in danger, she said. They're setting you up. The CEO, your father, both of them. They've been meeting behind your back. I stared at her, stunned. That's impossible. It's not, she said. I saw the transfer logs. Your father offered him a deal to hand over everything if he kept you out of it. The air felt thinner. He's selling me out to save himself, I whispered. Lila nodded slowly. He always would. I sank onto the couch, the room spinning in slow motion. Betrayal layered on betrayal, each more calculated than the last. Lila reached for my hand. You can still walk away, she said. But I shook my head. No, I said quietly. Walking away is what got me here. That night, I deleted every trace of hesitation. The plan shifted from survival to strategy. My father wanted to make a deal. The CEO wanted control. Both would get what they deserved, but not before I took what they valued most. I sent one email before shutting my laptop, a simple message to the CEO. Let's discuss terms. Tomorrow. The next morning, I walked into the office before the sun rose. The halls were silent, the city still half asleep outside the glass walls. I dressed in black, simple, sharp, deliberate. Every step felt heavier than the one before, not from fear, but from the weight of what I already knew was about to end. At 8 o'clock, the CEO arrived, all polished charm and practiced confidence. He greeted me like nothing had shifted, like he hadn't been exposed for what he really was. I waited until the door closed behind him before speaking. You said everyone wins, I began. I want to hear your version of that. He studied me, cautious now. You get immunity, a promotion, and distance from the mess your father created. We take control of his assets quietly. Clean, efficient, final. He leaned back. You'll walk out richer than you ever imagined. Me, cautious now. You get immunity, a promotion, and distance from the mess your father created. We take control of his assets quietly. Clean, efficient, final. He leaned back. You'll walk out richer than you ever imagined. I placed the folder on his desk. And if I told you there's no longer any asset left to take? His brows lifted, amusement flickering for a second. What do you mean? I turned the screen of my tablet toward him. Every account tied to my father's business was liquidated last night. The transfers are complete, routed through subsidiaries you own but don't monitor directly. I made sure the trail leads back to your shell companies. The color drained from his face. You wouldn't. I already did, I said quietly. And in about 30 minutes, those files will reach the same investigator you hired to follow me. He stood, trying to keep control. You're making a mistake. You'll destroy your career. No, I said. You built mine to use me. I'm just finishing what you started. His phone buzzed once, twice, then again. He didn't answer. The sound filled the room like a ticking clock. I could see the calculation in his eyes collapse, one layer at a time. You think this gives you power? He said. It gives you exposure. No, I said, standing. It gives me freedom. I walked out before he could reply. Behind me, I heard his chair scrape the floor, the sound of panic settling in. By the time I reached the elevator, my phone vibrated Lila. It's happening, she said. The investigation's gone public. Your father's company is being raided. Her voice shook. Are you sure about this? I stepped into the elevator, the doors closing around me like a seal. I've never been sure. Outside, the street buzzed with early traffic, people rushing toward jobs that didn't yet know their markets were about to shift. I walked through the crowd unnoticed, blending in for the first time in months. Every plan I'd made was now in motion. The money I'd redirected was safe, stored in a trust under a new name, mine, but not recognizable as me. My family's debts, their accounts, their reputations, all tethered to a collapsing empire. That afternoon, my father called. I almost didn't answer, but some part of me needed to hear it. His voice was sharp, desperate. What have you done? He demanded. They're freezing everything. Our accounts, our holdings, the house gone. I didn't respond right away. You sold me to save yourself, I said. Did you really think I wouldn't return the favor? He went silent. For a second, I thought the line had dropped. Then, quietly, you'll regret this. I ended the call. I'd spent my whole life regretting things I didn't do. This was the first time I didn't. That evening, I met Lila at the cafe where all of this had started. She looked different, tired, relieved, wary. You could have walked away, she said softly. I know, I replied. But then I'd still be the person they thought I was. We sat in silence for a while, watching the city change colors as the lights came on. What happens now? She asked. I smiled faintly. Now? I build something new. From scratch. No debts. No ties. She hesitated. And your family? I looked out the window. They'll learn what it's like to start from nothing. 2 days later, headlines filled the news feeds. Corporate investigation exposes multi-company fraud network. My father's name was everywhere, tied to transactions and offshore accounts that led directly back to the CEO's holdings. Both men were under review, their assets frozen, their reputations in ruins. My mother tried calling again, but this time the number was disconnected. My brother sent one final message. You could have saved us. I didn't reply. Saving them was never the point. In the office, chaos reigned. Executives whispered in corners, emails vanished, and the CEO's office stayed locked. By the end of the week, his resignation was public, labeled as personal reasons. I was summoned to the boardroom, temporarily, they said, to stabilize operations. I stood at the head of the table while they argued over strategy, and for the first time, I realized how quiet power feels. Not loud, not vengeful, just steady, controlled. The same people who once ignored me now waited for my approval. I didn't enjoy it, but I understood it. That night, when everyone had left, I walked through the empty floor. The city shimmered below, the glass reflecting my own face back at me, different now, harder, but honest in a way it had never been. I thought of the girl on the park bench months ago, holding a cracked phone and a message that read, "Congratulations, you finally hit rock bottom." I almost smiled. They were right, in a way. Hitting bottom had been the best thing that ever happened to me. As I gathered my things, the lights dimmed automatically, leaving only the city glow outside. My reflection lingered for a moment, then disappeared as I turned away. Everything I'd lost had brought me here, to this silence that didn't ache anymore.